Annella Krom was a Christian art teacher at a public Arizonan school who has been in the news recently after she was fired. Following an incident in which they failed a student on the grounds that his art project explored his identity as a trans person, it was discovered that she was actually targeting multiple transgender students. It was also found that she was using her position to try and force her conservative Christian beliefs on the other students. Now, whilst the subject has been in the papers, a lot of them have failed to report on the true extent of Krom's transgressions. They mostly focus on a single trans student and the reports from another one of their students who may or may not be LGBT+. The truth, however, is much more worrying. The district report details 5 students, 4 of which have been targeted and even been told that they deserve to suffer physical torture by Krom. Student 1 is the individual who has been the focus of the paper's coverage. Student 1 is a trans man who wanted to do his project depicting his transgender journey, his proposal for which was rejected by Krom on grounds that it was inappropriate due to Krom's religious beliefs. Between the 2nd and the 6th of August, Student 1 raised the issue with the school's counsellor who reviewed the project and informed the principal that there was nothing inappropriate about it. The principal notified Krom of this and told them that they were seeking a second opinion from an assistant superintendent. In response to this, Krom ordered Student 1 not to participate in class conversation, ordering him to work on his technique in silence. On the 7th of August, the assistant superintendent responded after having reviewed the proposal and found it to be appropriate for the class, at which point the principal told Krom to allow the student to work on his project. The following day, Krom told the principal that she needed to go on leave and attempted to use the threat of resignation as leverage to allow her to continue to discriminate against Student 1. On the 9th of August, Krom gave Student 1 0 out of 50 marks on the project, whilst also deducting general class points for failure to engage in class conversation during the period in which they had ordered the student to work in silence. On the 11th of August, Krom sent an email to the principal, stressing that they refused to change his marks. In this email, they actively misgendered and dead-named Student 1 in writing. This back and forth continued via email and at the 13th of August meeting, during which Student 1 challenged the marking on grounds of discrimination, and a second meeting on the matter was held on the 26th of August. At that meeting, Krom acknowledged that she had discriminated against a student on grounds of their religious beliefs. She acknowledged that she had refused to call transgender students by their preferred name and/or pronoun, as well as the fact that she knew that this actively harmed the students' mental health. Yet Krom believed her religious convictions were more important than the very well-being of her students. The teacher admitted to having taken Bibles from the staff room where students may go to request them without pressure, placing them in her classroom and telling her students to take them. One of the students who took the Bible was Student 2, the second and mostly forgotten transgender student in this story. Student 2 is a trans woman who back in May was targeted by Krom and told that her existence was sinful and that she deserved to be burned in eternal hellfire for her existence. Krom then ordered the students present not to share their conversation with the principal, showing us very clearly that Krom knew what she was doing was ethically vile and went against the school's codes of conduct. She then later admitted to these conversations at both meetings. Student 3 is another, possibly LGBT+ student who altered her topic for an assignment due to Krom's anti-LGBT+ views. Student 4, the other student focused on in the newspapers, is both pro-bodily autonomy and an outspoken non-believer, both traits which Krom targeted. Krom forced herself into a conversation students were having about abortion, telling them that it was murder, and ordering Student 4 to read a Bible. In a separate incident in which Student 4 was outspoken about her lack of belief in God, suddenly her overall grade dropped from 80% down to 60%. This was done without explanation, beyond Krom stating that there had been a change in dynamics. The district report, which investigated into the situation, stated that the student, quote, reasonably believed the change in her grading was the result of discrimination by teacher, end quote. Student 5 is a little different to the other 4 in that they actively sought Krom's views being a fellow Christian. The issue, however, is that rather than telling them to see them after class to discuss the subject, they used Student 5 as a shield to proselytize to the rest of the class. Krom has openly acknowledged on multiple occasions that she knows she is not allowed to proselytize on school time. Yet she has shown a flippant disregard for the law and shows zero remorse for her actions. Understandably, the district report found there to be severe violations of multiple codes of conduct and teacher contract, giving grounds for dismissal. Krom was offered a chance to defend herself at a hearing, which she failed to attend and was subsequently fired. Since then, she has begun working at a religious school. Which brings us to today's response. As very often happens with Christians who are abusive towards other demographics, including students, the Christian right has begun to present Krom as a hero going up against the evils of a secular government. And very recently, Krom appeared on Apologia Studios, during which she actively endangered Student 1 by mentioning his current legal name on air.
And so when I got who's the student,
That in itself marks Krom as being unfit to teach anyone. Dropping Student 1's name in such a toxic viewership when the name of the school is known publicly is dangerous for said student. That's right, considering the fact that Krom is misgendering and dead-naming him whilst doing this. Krom is actively painting a target on this student's back for potential abuse and even physical violence. I mean, how long does it take to do a search for the student's name in relation to the school to find potential candidates? This once and for all puts an end to her claims that she doesn't wish harm upon the student. If that were the case, then she wouldn't go out of her way to disclose information that could result in said student being targeted with transphobic violence. Krom's not just a bad teacher, she's a thoroughly shitty human being. Now, what's somewhat interesting is one of the excuses Krom introduces during this interview to explain why she refused to grade Student 1's project. Something that's worth discussing and how it's entirely absent from any early arguments, only appearing now, seemingly as a means to try and introduce reasonable doubt, suggesting that perhaps she wasn't targeting a trans student over his existence.
and I know the student extremely well. So I knew that she already had it's no secret, okay? So it's like, I already knew what her ideas were coming into it. So when I was promoting this, and it was new this year that it's inquiry-based. So you're supposed to be asking questions rather than coming with an answer, first and foremost. I was trying to push that a little bit more because I knew what was going to happen a little bit. And so I was saying, make sure it's an inquiry, make sure it's an inquiry. And they submitted all of their basically their, oh goodness, I can't think of the word. What they wanted to do for their projects.
Their ideas for the project.
Yeah, they put their projects and they sent them to me in documents. And so when I got who's the student, she had a whole bunch of questions that she had already answered herself, basically. It's not really inquiry-based. It's not like she's doing a research project on it. She already knows her answers. She already is biased to the information. So I basically told her, I think your concept is too controversial for the classroom. And, because first and foremost, in a classroom environment, I don't think sexuality in any way belongs in the classroom. I think you could possibly do that project outside of class. I don't see why you can't.
So we have the claim that Krom wouldn't allow Student 1 to do his project because, according to her unfounded opinion, the student's work would not act as an inquiry. Now, we'll come back to that in a second. But first, I'd just like to have Krom read out the content of the original email sent to Student 1. The email that caused him to seek out the school's counsellor.
Yeah.
So, what did you send in the email? What did you say?
Let me tell you.
Okay.
I said, due to the topic you have chosen for your piece, I cannot approve your concept. It is a controversial topic, and because I do not want to spark division in the classroom, and because it is inappropriate for the classroom environment, I would like you to think of a different topic. There are many different ways to take this project, so due to the content, you should either choose another avenue to create an AP project. Once you develop a new concept, feel free to email me. Thank you for your understanding.
So as we can see, the idea that this project was rejected for reasons relating to the project itself and the criteria that the students were set is a flat-out fabrication. This was never the case and is likely why it was never mentioned in the district report. Student 1 was not told this in the email in which his project was rejected. Instead, all we have is Krom telling the student that their existence in class is both inappropriate and controversial. For a start, this is an advanced placement class, a high school class in which students are expected to tackle US college level material, university to those of us who work within the British system. To claim that discussion surrounding the existence of transgender people was inappropriate there was to declare it inappropriate for both US college and subsequently the rest of society. In effect, you have told the student that you believe they don't have the right to exist in public. Now, I don't know if the conflation of being transgender as sexuality comes from mere ignorance or simple spite. But either way, it is inaccurate to describe it in those terms. A trans person's reflections on their gender is in no way more inherently sexual than a cis person's reflections on their gender. Though, even if it were, that's still part of public discourse. But if a cis person were to, for example, do art exploring the very ideas of masculinity or femininity by displaying the many forms these ideas take, I doubt Krom would have taken an issue. But because it's a trans person doing it, Krom feels the need to effectively stamp that out. To target the student and tell them that their very existence has no place in our society, that said existence is up for debate and that they deserve to be tortured for it. That is bigotry, that is transphobia, and Krom deserved not simply to be fired from her job, but to be banned from teaching altogether. Whichever religious school they now work for has designated this as an okay standard when it comes to the mistreatment of LGBT+ people. And that's fucking sickening. As for this idea that she knew the student had nothing to question in relation to their gender, that's an absolutely ridiculous prejudice on her part. In my experience as a trans person, we have more questions than cis people about our gender and what it means for our place in the world. I think Krom believes the existence of trans people to be like that of Christians, that we only exist in the sense that they've accepted some ideology with strict tenets. The truth, meanwhile, is that it's nothing like an ideology, it's an intrinsic part of who we are, something we have to explore ourselves to fully understand. We are our own explorers when it comes to gender and what it means to us. And I think Student 1 displays this with what little glimpse we're given here.
But like, I took the day off after that and said, I just need a day to figure this out. And had everybody turn in all of their sketches on that Friday, which was that Friday. And as I was looking at her sketches for her pieces, that was really, I mean, I already knew that I couldn't grade it, right? Because you're giving a grade to something that you don't believe in. You're doing the job that you said you weren't going to do. But when I looked at her pieces, it just made my heart ache because she took the imagery in her artistic piece. Her image of herself was that of a lamb. So she used biblical imagery. And it just hurts me because like she used biblical imagery to portray the fact that she is an innocent as a transgender person.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw it and I was just like, okay. And I couldn't give her a grade. Can't say, okay, well you did the work, whatever, and just give it to her. Yeah.
It's complicated because you're going against your convictions.
So what relevance does this have beyond displaying the fragility of Krom's personality? Well, it gives us a possible insight into the sort of questions the student may have been asking. Something that's been very prominent in American discourse the past few years is the myth of the trans predator, the invented narrative that trans people are transitioning to invade women's spaces and rape small girls. Therefore, it's very possible that the student was questioning those perceptions, their lack of foundation to them, presenting themselves as the innocent yet despised, the way many Christians pretend they are. The icon of a lamb has no relevance to their gender directly. The genders aren't man, woman, and lamb. It had to have been part of a greater discussion about their gender and its relation to society. Therefore, the limiting factor to this student's work seems to have been Krom's ignorant assumptions. 2 other officials looked into this work and found it to be within the guidelines set out by Krom. Yet, Krom chose to put religious prejudice before the job she had agreed to do, to target a student and effectively bully them over their identity. I mean, even if they'd failed some element of their art project, something that the district report does not uphold, Krom still refused to mark it on its merits. A completed project, even if flawed in some massive way, is not worth 0 out of 50 marks. I mean, there is the technique, as mentioned earlier, which is marked separately to the concept. Yet, that's what she did.
Krom gave the students 0 out of a possible 50 points for the project, telling the principal that a higher grade would violate her conscience.
Ah, yes. So, a lot of people are mad at me for, and the truth is that I gave her a 0. I did. In this instance, this was after I had discussed with the principal and discussed with the student. Basically, I mean, without being too dramatic about it, I kind of like begged the student to pick something else. Because I personally didn't want to go through all this, to be honest. I kind of wanted to avoid the whole thing. And I had the conversation with the student, and I talked to the principal, and the principal came back to me and said, "You're going on with it. You need to do this." And
so you're being forced to educate and to teach in the context of something that violates your conscience as a Christian.
Yeah, pretty bluntly.
On a fundamental aspect of morals, and that is human sexuality and gender issues.
And I told my principal as well that this is not something that I'm okay with, and that I would be okay with resigning over it. Like, to that degree that I'm not playing around with if this is okay or not. And he thought I was bluffing or something. I'm not really sure.
More likely, he just understood that your bigoted beliefs, regardless of origin, do not give you the right to discriminate against a human being for an intrinsic and vital aspect of their existence. Note how, right here, Krom makes it absolutely clear that her problem is not with anything academic, with the work, just the LGBT+ component. Once again, Krom reaffirms her position that LGBT+ people do not have a place in the public sphere, which art is included in. And this is where we come to how the case is being used by the Christian right to paint their usual persecution narrative. This idea that public schools aren't neutral unless they allow their teachers to target students and actively abuse them for aspects of their existence.
And so the East Valley Tribune says this. In an email, Krom told the principal she does not condone the LGBTQ lifestyle and won't assist in creating artwork that glorifies it, the report said.
Yeah.
True?
Yes.
Okay.
That is true.
Okay. Because you're a Christian.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be a neutral environment.
It's supposed to be.
We'd imagine that there's a level of tolerance to say, well, I understand your perspective on sexuality, so we'll respect your views on sexuality and try to find some way around this.
Mm-hmm.
What you did is you actually displayed that you're violating their perspective and their law of what they condone as appropriate sexuality. Mm-hmm. So what we're really seeing here is that the public school system is not neutral like it pretends to be. It actually has a perspective, and Christianity and Orthodox Christian beliefs about human sexuality and gender are not allowed.
Right.
That's what needs to be highlighted here. Some might say, well, it's not right that you were saying as a Christian, I don't want to see that. Mm-hmm. But in reality, in a neutral zone, everybody's perspective is supposed to be tolerated.
Absolutely.
The teacher should be allowed to have, if you're a neutral educating zone, a teacher should be able to say, I don't actually agree with that perspective. I don't want to have that.
Nobody was saying that Krom had to change her perspective on LGBT+ people. Yet, if that perspective results in her being unable to teach without targeting students, bullying them, then she's not fit to teach. We can't be tolerant of your views when those views are intolerant of our very existence. That's the case for everyone, whether they're Christian or not. Krom's actions are no different to, say, a white supremacist teacher telling a black student that doing a project on their heritage is inappropriate on the grounds that said teacher disagrees with their existence in public. And just as we shouldn't tolerate racism in schools, we also shouldn't tolerate either transphobia, biphobia, or homophobia in schools. Krom's bigotry comes with a cost and is counted in body bags, specifically of the young LGBT+ people she has helped make feel unsafe around figures of trust such as teachers and doctors. Something that Krom actually tries to capitalize on without the slightest understanding of the subject to argue her case.
At our school, also, our suicide/self-harm rate is insane. So crazy that on the back of our IDs, it has a suicide hotline. Like, it's so bad. And there's no one sees what the actual out is. So when you would say, come into this neutral environment and say, look, there is an answer, there is a truth. I'm not saying here, you're going to read the Bible in my classroom and going through Psalms and stuff, but I am saying if you just see what you do with it, basically. This is the gospel, this is what it is. That's what I did in my classroom for those 6 months.
And in a situation where there's a neutral environment like this, and there's supposed to be toleration for everyone's beliefs and no discrimination,
right?
You shouldn't have been discriminated against.
Ideally.
Technically. In theory.
Yes.
The usage of suicide without any understanding of why it occurs, dropping student one's name and admitting on record that she knows she's psychologically hurting her trans students by misgendering and dead-naming them, are what pissed me off most about said case. Now, as an arts teacher, is Krom a trained counsellor? No. Has the Bible ever been demonstrated to be an effective means of suicide and self-harm prevention? No. Are her actions actively contributing to the environment that results in high levels of attempted suicide, specifically of LGBT+ individuals? Yes. And allow me to discuss the evidence that shows that. The Trevor Project published their nationwide survey on LGBTQ youth mental health earlier this year. They found that if a young LGBT+ individual had experienced any attempts to convince them to change either their gender or their sexuality, that their attempted suicide rate nearly tripled from 8% to 23%. Note, this refers to any attempts to convince. So-called conversion or reparative therapy is discussed separately in the report. And whilst the study came out this year, it only supports what we already knew. A 2014 report put together by the Williams Institute stated, quote, "Respondents who experienced rejection by family and friends, discrimination, victimization, or violence had elevated prevalence of suicide attempts," end quote. Now they specified that this included those who faced, quote, "discrimination, victimization, or violence at school, at work, and when accessing healthcare," end quote. When Krom told students 1 and 2 that their identities were inappropriate for a mature art class, they were telling them that they are not welcome in society. That puts the students in a spot where they're being asked in a roundabout way to pick between who they are as people and participating in society as cis people do. But it goes beyond that. The other students are aware of this, and whilst a few of them thankfully spoke out against Krom's appalling behaviour, some of them will internalise her bigotry and make it their own. They'll feel emboldened by Krom, able to go out there and tell LGBT+ people that their very existence is vile, is evil, and needs to stop, that they deserve to be physically tortured in hell for who they are. You are not the solution. You are the problem, as is everyone working at Apologia Studios, and indeed all those arguing that a teacher has the right to target their students and discriminate against them. You claim that what you do out of love, maybe you actually believe that. If so, you've allowed your personal ideas of religion to corrupt the very word love in your mind. Since you don't seem to know, love is not abuse, compassion is not violence, and bigotry is not neutral, even when one makes arguments as bad as these.
I'd imagine we can think about the flip side, if there was an LGBTQ educator and a Christian student who said, no, this is the way I want my project, I want it like this, and it says that sexuality is only whole and holy and good between a man and a woman, and the educator said, well, that's not my perspective, I really don't like that project, I don't think we'd be having this conversation.
Yeah.
It's flipped because you're a Christian with a Christian view of human sexuality.
Student 1 was not seeking to cultivate a climate in which Krom is stripped of her humanity in a way that has driven many to suicide. Student 1 was seeking to express his identity. Krom sought to silence that expression because she personally thought Student 1 should be ashamed of and even tortured for an important part of their intrinsic identity. I can state very plainly that a black student should be free to do a project celebrating their heritage, yet a white supremacist should not be free to do a project seeking to invalidate that black student's humanity. In the same vein, an LGBT+ student should be free to do a project celebrating their identity, yet an anti-LGBT+ student, Christian or not, should not be allowed to do a project seeking to invalidate said LGBT+ student's humanity. So this isn't a case of Christian views aren't welcome, like you pretend. It's a case of any views which seek to allow teachers to abuse the students in their care aren't welcome. And if that describes your Christianity, then you need to do some deep reflection. By the way, this is solely talking about students. When a bigoted teacher enters the equation, the whole dynamic shifts. The bigotry and its impact is amplified due to the position of trust. Which brings us rather nicely onto the charges surrounding abortion, namely how Krom told Student 4 that abortions were immoral and that she needed to read the Bible to improve on her morality. This is how Krom first presented the subject.
One student told administrators Krom questioned their pro-choice beliefs regarding abortion, gave the student a Bible, and encouraged the student to rethink their morals. Shame on you.
I know.
First, I read that and I say, hey, praise God. How about we all tolerate one another's beliefs in this context? So what's being said here is that the students are allowed to have conversations supporting abortion. That perspective is tolerated, but not the perspective of a Christian who wants to say, well, why don't you consider this? Tell us about this incident.
Okay, so what occurred in my classroom, and this was at the end of last year when I was feeling extremely convicted about, my faith and, really coming into growth as a Christian and really trying to remain consistent in my life a little bit. This is when the Texas abortion thing was going on. And everyone at my school was talking and saying all of these evil things, talking about abortion, being okay with it, and da 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 da. One of my tables in the front of my classroom was having a conversation pretty bluntly about how abortion is pretty cool. And I just kept hearing it and kept hearing it, and I was just like, and my heart is just hurting. So
it's supposed to be a neutral zone.
It's supposed to be a neutral zone. And
so isn't everyone allowed to give their perspective?
Yeah, ideally it would be great.
If there was such a thing as
neutrality to be a thing.
Yeah.
However, and at the time, I thought it was extremely well received. There was conversation back and forth. Students were talking with me. I was hearing their side. It was a conversation that I thought was a conversation that was productive.
You're a teacher, a figure of trust and authority in these students' lives. Do you understand why they may have been hesitant to challenge you on violating that trust to proselytize? There's a large power imbalance when it comes to teacher-student relations, which is one of the reasons all teachers are expected to mind what they tell students. Just because the students were having a conversation about something does not then mean you have to force your viewpoint upon that conversation. You could have told them that said conversation had nothing to do with art class, therefore take it outside another time. Now what's really interesting is the way Krom presents this interaction as if it were a civil and respectful discussion. I say interesting because of what they go on to acknowledge later on in the interview.
Maybe I even said, like, it is murder, because it is. That's the truth of the fact. Scientifically, you know, you can't skirt around the truth.
Human being.
So, human being.
You're taking the life of a human being, yes.
And so all of these high schoolers, no experience, talking about it was insane. So, basically, I just said, this is the view on it. This is what I think. I never handed her a Bible. I may have said, you know, this is the gospel. That's true. Like, I have, in that end 6 months of my job, I was giving the gospel to students because it hurt me to see the darkness in my classroom every single day and no one seeing a way out.
Well, first of all, abortion is not murder from either a scientific or an ethical perspective. Science shows us that a zygote in the time frame in which non-necessary abortion procedures take place has no sense of consciousness or even the ability to sense pain. It is a clump of cells indistinguishable from a cancer. Yet even if it was a human being, an actual child, it still wouldn't be murder. This is on account of bodily autonomy. If there was a child bleeding out in the next room and you had the same blood type yet refused to give said blood, even though it grows back, that would still not be murder. The exact same principle applies to a zygote. Hell, even a dead body has that right. If a person decides before their death that they don't want to be harvested for their organs, doctors can't touch those organs no matter how many actual human lives it would save because of bodily autonomy. Which is horrific when we consider the fact that throughout many places in the world, this implies cis women, trans men, and non-binary people with a womb will have more rights as a corpse when they die than when they're alive. Now, blocking abortion access doesn't just violate bodily autonomy, it violates numerous human rights. But all I need is that one and your position is crushed. If you'd like to know more, then perhaps take a science or philosophy class. Either way, you are not stating the facts. You are asserting your baseless opinion as the facts. Now this comes immediately before Krom goes on to discuss suicide. Therefore I'm wondering if she was attempting to imply that abortion results in depression, self-harm, and suicide. So I just wanted to stop to quickly discuss the statistics on that. 95% of people who have an abortion feel it was the right decision, including 89% of those who have some form of regret. What's more is that regret can be demonstrated to be caused by the abuse received by people like Krom, because that's something we have to consider. These are students well into their mid-teens. It's very possible that they're sexually active, and it's also possible that they may have even had an abortion. And having a group of friends supportive of them in that decision is great. What's not great, however, is Krom forcing herself into their discussion and declaring abortion to be murder. Now that may or may not have been the case here, but the fact is it very easily could have been, which is why Krom should not be engaging with students in this fashion. Which, by the way, was not polite and productive. Telling students that holding to their human rights is murder is the very opposite of polite and productive. Krom violated the trust she'd been given as a teacher of these students and used that as a means to proselytize. And the students felt they had no way to reassert boundaries. That wasn't until Krom went too far and someone stood up to her, at which point others also stood up. That is the power of the collective. I should also note that next to nobody believes abortion is a wonderful thing. It's a stressful and highly stigmatized process, but one which is absolutely necessary in any civilized society. Those of us who are pro-bodily autonomy much prefer comprehensive sex education over abortion. But a person should not be stripped of their human rights for a non-sentient clump of cells which, by the way, carries with it a 31% chance of medical complications. Of course, student 4 is also the same student who had their marks suddenly change from 80% to 60% without explanation after they defended their outspoken non-belief. I should also note that Krom outright denies this ever occurred.
So one of the other things that's alleged is the same student alleged that shortly after telling Krom that they were agnostic or an atheist, the teacher lowered their grade on an assignment without explanation.
Right. Right. That is a bold-faced lie, and I know that as a teacher in general, I would never do such a thing.
Yeah.
Not due to any, I mean, if that was the case, I would be doing that for everybody or whatever, because
Well,
I was not in a,
Your
I was in a
Christian,
secular school.
your Christian convictions in the area of integrity are the same type of convictions and commitments in the area of sexuality.
Absolutely.
And your Christian convictions over integrity wouldn't allow you to do such a thing.
Right. I'm try to be consistent
Right.
in my views.
Because that's
so.
the Christian perspective.
That's the Christian perspective, yeah. That's
So-
what I'm held to.
We'd love it if there was some tolerance for that perspective.
However, as already noted, after reviewing the evidence, the district report found that, quote, student 4 reasonably believed the change in her grading was the result of discrimination by teacher, end quote. So it would appear that Krom has no integrity, that they're simply lying on the one aspect of what occurred that even they don't believe they can twist and contort to try and make themselves out to be the victim. Now, I've talked about the power imbalance involved with teacher-student relations. I've discussed how bigotry is not neutral and is not welcome in schools, no matter the source. But what I haven't discussed is the cited reason for Krom's termination, namely their violation of numerous district codes and their teacher contract.
Okay, so when I got my job, and this is, from a teacher perspective as well, when I signed my contract every year, I know that this is a big thing that kind of came up. When I signed my contract every year, you just sign the financial part. So it's like, when are you getting paid and how much are you getting paid? And this is your pay raise, da 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 da. That's what they tell you. Back in the day, and I'm sure I could look it up, so I guess this is a little ignorant of me as to what I'm held to with gender pronouns and things like that. I didn't know that I was signing off on those things as well. When I signed my contract for the year, it's monetary. That's all you sign online. So I wanted to put that out there first because
Yes.
that's what I've been signing the last 3 years.
You made a monetary covenant
Yeah.
with this institution.
So that's what I've been signing for years is how much you're getting paid, da da da. So it was just like sign your contract, move on, kind of a thing. And so that's what I would look at every year. That's it. So when I signed the contract this year and I got into my job, my heart had changed because of where I am in my faith now. But I didn't really, how do I explain it? I didn't really expect or want to create a huge amount of strife with anybody. When I first, came into school this year, my thought was, well, I'm gonna, try again, new year,
I'm
new
gonna
me
teach art.
kind of thing. I'm just gonna teach art. That's what I thought I was gonna do.
Yes.
We actually know the day she signed her teacher's employment contract detailing the ethics she was to uphold. It was not 3 years ago, as she pretends, but the 8th of May 2019. This was a contract effective during the 2019 to 2020 fiscal year, commencing on the 16th of July 2019. Said contract contains the following lines. Teacher shall not discriminate against any employee, student, parent, contractor, or other member of the public because of a person's gender, sexual orientation, race, religion, colour, national origin, age, or disability. End quote. So we have another bold-faced lie on Krom's part. So much for her integrity in the 9th commandment, eh? Now, I don't think there's much to discuss when it comes to whether or not Krom should have been fired. She openly admitted to knowing full well that her actions were harming her students, and yet she still believes she has the right to do so. Krom has no place in any teaching position, and the school that took her in is a school that is okay with students being abused by members of staff. She violated her signed contract on multiple occasions, showed clear knowledge that her actions were in the wrong in setting about hiding said actions from the principal, and then lied about knowing the contents of her contract. And for that, she's held up as some Christian hero. Well, now you know the truth of what actually occurred. Hopefully you appreciate this video and how it discussed what took place beyond the two instances most of the papers seem to be focusing on. As always, please check out our other videos. You can also support Essence of Thought via Patreon, and in doing so, help us become ad-free. We'd just like to say a big thank you to everyone who's already given to the channel, giving a special thanks to the following people: Hannah Banghart, Matthew Kovac, Mook Gay, Amit Devojny, Erica Ann James, Steve Corbin, Caitlin Smart, Wellington Marcus, Atlas5, and Slash Daniels. And for myself and Adita, take care now.